That's Josh coming through with the security, or either the passport control. Josh, we're in Holland, we made it past the passport control. Let's go smoke some weed. Tired of the monotony of everyday life, I was craving adventure. So, motivated by the fact that Amsterdam might soon restrict tourists from buying weed, I convinced my childhood mate Josh to join me on a bike ride to Amsterdam. Even though it's the middle of winter, we have old bikes and minimal training. Nevertheless, we bought some supplies and set a date for a few weeks' time. The plan was to cycle the 80 miles from London to Harwich in Essex, from where we would get an overnight ferry to the Hook of Holland. After docking in the morning, we would then cycle about 50 miles up to Amsterdam. We estimated it to take a little over 24 hours. After crappy British weather delayed our departure a few times, we left from London on a sunny Monday morning full of confidence and optimism. We're away. It was 11:30 a.m. and the ferry was leaving from Harwich at 10 p.m. Our first stop, after covering about 15 miles in 1.5 hours, was at a pub in Romford, Essex. Here we had some beers and food and were still pretty optimistic. We also weren't in much of a rush. However, that would soon change. Pretty much as soon as we left the pub, I noticed an elderly lady struggling to balance as she walked down the street.
Booked a taxi for her, waited with her, had a few laughs.
But it's cost us about 30 minutes, so
we need to get moving now.
From now on, any old people we see that struggling, fuck them. At this rate, we were going to be pushed to make it to the ferry on time. We needed to basically just cycle with no stops. The next few hours went by uneventful as we cycled through a number of Essex towns. We hit the halfway point at 4:30, 5 hours after setting off, and we were just on schedule to make the ferry, providing we didn't stop. As the cityscape morphed into countryside, the sun started to set, and this is where things got real. For the last few hours, we found ourselves cycling along busy roads, including dual carriageways in the pitch black. We had lights, but you couldn't see very far in front of you as there was no lampposts. Oh! You're right.
I looked back because my bag was coming undone.
Ah, yeah.
And then...
Time was running out quickly. Those last 2 hours were honestly torture. But somehow, after a total of 10 hours on the road, we pulled into Harwich and made it to the ferry with 15 minutes spare before check-in closed.
I
know, man, that was grueling, 10 times harder than I thought, 10 times scarier than I thought, and I never want to do it again. Fatigued, depressed and cold, we stumbled onto the ferry. We both felt like crying and our bodies just felt depleted. There was minimal security checks getting on the ferry, so I managed to take a bit of weed on board. But we were so tired that neither of us even wanted to smoke. We just got into our cabin, had the best shower of our lives, and collapsed into our bunk beds for the overnight journey. We docked at the Hook of Holland at 8 a.m, 21 hours after setting off from London. We made the decision the night before that we would abandon any plans to cycle the 5 hours or so to Amsterdam. Instead, we got the train via Rotterdam to Haarlem, which is a city close to Amsterdam where our Airbnb was located. We quickly found a coffee shop and skinned up a big joint.
Right, the time is 11:19 on the 2nd. That's 24.5 hours since we left London. And the first joint is rolled.
The joint was one of the most satisfying we've ever had. For the next day and a half, we made the most of Haarlem and Amsterdam. Smoking, drinking, cycling and tripping, until it was time to get the train and ferry back home on Wednesday. So you could say the trip was a failure, but we didn't feel that way. We cycled over 80 miles in one day. We battled against the dark and cold as well as our own fatigued bodies and minds, and we made it. Which is why I implore you to set yourself a challenge, something that gets you outside and moving. Life is short, and living it behind a screen is wasting your God-given will.